Hello, and welcome back to another episode of our Ranking Shooter series. I've been hard at work on other videos and other projects, so I didn't really prepare any kind of intro. So we're gonna roll just right into the footage this week. From the very menu, you kinda get what kind of game Darkest of Days is. The menus and load screens, for that matter, feel incredibly amateurish, consisting of static PNGs of 3D gun models from the game, and a menu primarily cobbled together from very basic commands and next to no actual UI design. This game really just throws you into the action, starting with the Battle of Little Bighorn. Jesus Christ. So you are a soldier fighting under General Custer's command, and you just kind of start shooting Native Americans, and that's how the game starts. And then you get shot in the dick by an arrow, which, good, imperialist scum. But oh no, this isn't just a Civil War game where you play for 2 minutes and you die. You are abducted by this crewmate here, and told to go fight through history, basically. Like, okay, this Civil War soldier who is just going to shock from losing his dick in an arrow fight is going to take this in stride. If it sounds like I'm a little bit all over the place, that's because that's exactly the mindset this game puts you into. 1 minute, you're in a dramatic life or death battle with next to no context for who you are or why you're there, and then you are abducted and sent through time, and you're listening to a computer, derivatively named Mother, that runs the time machine you'll be using. And then she says some stuff that all blended together, and I didn't really listen that much because this game throws entire walls of text at you, and none of the storytelling is good. It's just an abrupt stand-in-place lore dump. This game really, really wants to have that kind of Sci-Fi Channel original movie schlocky quality to it, but whatever excitement this game may have had is just a golf ball sucked through several minutes of a garden hose composed entirely of boredom. These long, boring exposition scenes are unskippable and make up most of the game's story as you just stand still and listen as this lady looks in on you, sounding like she's voiced entirely by a voice encoder. Despite backstories for the eras and the missions you go on, the characters you encounter there have almost nothing to do with those stories. You basically go places, follow the objectives, and then teleport out of there. There are multiple campaigns, technically, that, despite different weapons and time periods, feel annoyingly similar, but I'll get to that in a bit. After 10 minutes of story, the game thrusts you into training where you learn that the left stick is crouch and the B button is grenades. What the fuck? I get wanting to do your own thing and branching out a little bit from the COD or Halo controls of the day, but B for grenades? Are you out of your fucking gourd? Oh, but Darkest of Days also has one of the most fucked control schemes ever because the crouch button can't be toggled and there's no option to change it, meaning that anytime you want to move while crouched, you'll likely have to leave cover and take damage. So that sucks. The controls and feedback just don't feel great. I think the best word to describe this game is floaty, with a hovering moon gravity and a nebulous ADS mechanic that feels like you're sliding around on ice whenever you try and get a beat on opponents. A huge reticle also takes up the screen when firing from the hip. Well, it's not terrible, and hip firing works fine. It's just an annoying design choice I wanted to note. The UI does make some interesting choices. It opts for a mostly sparse presentation, with many of the feedback indicators taking place around the center reticle. The active reload, stripped straight from Gears of War, fills up clockwise, and the turret overheating meter likewise fills a circle from the bottom. It's a neat bit of intuitive design that keeps the player informed at all times while still maintaining a minimal presentation, so kudos to that, large reticles aside. So the first mission starts out pretty aimlessly, but it has a really interesting idea to it, setting the player loose in a small open world to find their way to objectives and stay with their squad. The flow here feels alright, and it actually feels like you could get lost at any time if you don't stick with your squad, despite the sparse forest looking like Digital Homicide tried to make a Skyrim clone in Unity. But that's not the only visual problem. In fact, throughout this level, the underlying issues of Darkest of Days really begin to rear their head. From the hilarious low-frame crowd animations to this one narcoleptic Confederate soldier that just forgets to wake up when his camp is ambushed. And these issues, the plain, muddy visuals and poor performance, will be with you throughout the entire game, so it's best to get used to them now. The game does eventually get to some vaguely interesting bits, but it takes far too long, and some of what could have been truly interesting moments are so poorly handled that they become laughable. For example, your character suddenly gets put into a fucking concentration camp, and there's a brief section where the game threatens to explore this concept, but one objective marker later and you're breaking out. Moments like this, and the aforementioned Custer's Last Stand the game opens with, would feel exploitative and grimy if they weren't so slapdash and clueless. It's hard to feel gravity of moments like a concentration camp when every character model looks the same. But the game's problems certainly don't stop at the story, as the open-ended level design is full of holes. For example, enemies aren't super smart, but they are high damage, and they spread out over the plains like butter, meaning that you'll find yourself converged on from every side even if you take cover sometimes. There's no real encounter design to speak of. AI allies and enemies intermingle, wandering all over and shooting each other whenever they feel like it, breaking any semblance of immersion these large-scale battles were probably going for. This flow can also lead to frustrating trial and error checkpoints where you kind of have to piece together which enemies are coming from where first, and just hope that the AI acts the same each time so you can take them out and progress. It doesn't help that taking damage smears the COD-style jelly across your screen, obscuring your view as you frantically try to flee for cover. There's also kinda not much in the way of level design, for that matter. Across most of the time periods, you fight through a lot of drab forestry, which I can only imagine was a way to make the game's big environments a selling point while keeping the overall asset usage down. A lot of the time, those forests are just sprawls with sparse cover juggling you between objective checkpoints. It takes what could have been a really interesting style of level navigation and utterly squanders it with tepid visual variety and repetition. I mean, this is a World War I game with barely any trenches, a World War II game with no quaint countryside villages or beachheads, and a Civil War game with no town squares. But if you want to see hills and farmhouses, this game has you covered in any era. Honestly though, this is the biggest disappointment in the game, as it squanders its interesting premise with levels that you can barely tell the difference between. The most visual variety you'll see comes several hours in when they throw some snow on the ground. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. While the game does have some impressively large environments and an interesting spin on navigation, it doesn't do much good when the proceedings are so aimless. Darkest of Days isn't short on trying new things, but those things should fit together cohesively to be fun. Enemy waves wander around in the massive undetailed environments, looking for allies to get into scrimmages with. Allies likewise stand around doing nothing until an enemy comes into range. The environments are so large they often make what otherwise might be impressive crowd sizes seem small, undercutting the feeling of epic scale. The cavernous environments and scattered encounters especially add to the feeling of aimlessness during holdout encounters. We're often wandered around looking for enemies only to wait for more to pop up, and repeat ad nauseum until the game is ready to move on. It's a shame that so much of the game is this aimless, frustrating mess, because the game's final level set in Pompeii is actually pretty good, balancing solid set-piece design with futuristic weapons and actual level design. The spaces here shift between open marketplaces and tight structural interiors, allowing players to actually push a front line and leverage the strength of the game's weapons. It's additionally frustrating that this level, which is still mediocre in any game that counts, by the way, is saved for the final stretch of the game. This final stretch also includes the first time you get your hands on this super overpowered weapon, which is a sequence rendered immediately uncool by how many people will easily overpower you. The frame rate, as I've come to expect with games of this caliber, is inconsistent at best, and in some of the larger battles, decimates to some of the worst performance I've ever seen in a console game. And by now that's really saying something. But with so many models on screen at any given point and the scale the game is trying to work in, I at least understand where the horsepower is going. But that doesn't excuse the other major victim the game's large environments take, the visuals. This game doesn't look good on a good day, but the texture pop-in, flat textures, and drab lighting throughout suck whatever life was left in the withered husk of this up-resed PS2 game. Animations don't fare much better, and collision detection is hinky throughout. You'll often just get caught on stuff for no apparent reason. Oh, and to top it all off, these huge environments have plenty of invisible walls, sometimes in nonsensical places like a front line you may be trying to flank. The sound design is... Let me put it this way. There was a moment when this ridiculous 3-kill stack happened, and the bodies started jittering together, and it took me a few seconds to realize that the sound I was hearing was supposed to be a machine gun in the distance, and not just the death throes of a regular glitch. The music is generic repetitive, and voice samples feel like they were recorded over a phone. And all of these complaints are on top of the visual glitches and bugs throughout the whole game. Not a level went by I didn't see one model glitch through another or stand on the air. I will say that while the shooting is floaty and unsatisfying, the weapon variety is actually pretty impressive. Each time period has a standard array of pistols, grenades, and rifles, which all act differently, mostly when it comes to clip size and reloading. The reload animations themselves deserve a call out, as there are unique animations for each, including different animations for when guns jam during an active reload. The long reload times also add a nice variety to gameplay between the time periods, helping to set them apart despite the incredibly repetitive environments. It's actually kind of fun to strafe back and forth in the Civil War levels where rifles take a minute to reload, like playing a game of long-range tag where enemies are also taking a long time to reload. Then there are the future weapons. Throughout the game, there are times where futuristic armaments make their way to past battles, and these moments are where the game actually shines brightest. Being able to mow down large mobs of Confederate soldiers with a cyberpunk assault rifle, or just obliterating German soldiers with a 5-shot rocket launcher that flies into the air and crashes down like a Stinger missile. There's even a pretty darn good shotgun, which has an impressive range and shot spread and does some devastating damage. There are also these little cyber marbles that you throw like confetti at enemies you shouldn't kill. It's a weird, neat idea that gives the game a sense of cheesy fun I wish carried throughout the whole experience. Darkest of Days is a very bad game, but not for lack of trying. It seems constrained by budget and hamstrung by its own ambition. A few good ideas wrapped in a poorly optimized sludge of 360-era mediocrity. The huge environments, unique weapons, and large-scale encounters feel like they could be tried again with modern console constraints and fulfill the vision these devs were going for. But as it sits, Darkest of Days isn't even goofy or fun enough to recommend on its curiosities alone, because it's such a miserable and repetitive experience. Though, the game does have this cute little Easter egg secret mission where you defend the development team, and the map looks like this, which is goofy and pretty neat. It's the kind of charm you just stop seeing in games from this time, and I miss it dearly. But charm alone can't save this game, and even if it could, this is far from enough to have me forgive the frustrating mess I suffered through to reach this little Easter egg. Darkest of Days is a bad game, no doubt about it, but it has a certain charm to it that might attract some players. Yet, unlike something like Shellshock 2 and Turning Point, Darkest of Days isn't charming enough to offset how poorly handled and frustrating the whole experience is, even for the most hardcore FPS enthusiasts. Its jumbled together pieces are more frustrating to interact with than almost any other game I've played. It's not that the game is challenging, it's just annoying. The only thing saving this from the bottom slot is that while it didn't execute on anything well, Darkest of Days at least had some interesting ideas, which is more than I can say for Hour of Victory. Wanted Weapons of Fate is a 2008 third-person shooter developed by Grin, makers of the PC versions of Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter and Terminator Salvation. Yeesh. Well, Wanted must have gotten better funding of the studio's last two projects because this game is better than Terminator Salvation on every front. In fact, it's not half bad as a shooter. It's just kind of lame. Based on the universe of the film Wanted, which everyone remembers, right? You remember Wanted. It was one of those not the Matrix movies that came out in the mid-2000s. Hey, remember Priest? Underworld? Equilibrium? The One? Yeah, it's one of those. The stylish action genre of cinema. Anyway, you play as the wettest James McAvoy model ever put to polygons, and I think maybe the only time he's been in a game. It's not him voice acting, and you can tell, but whatever. The game starts with a few tutorials showing off its cover system and suppressing fire systems, where blind firing at an enemy will make them hunker down and cover so you can flank them. After a brief tutorial, it's off to the races. I'll be honest, I don't remember much of Wanted. I saw it when it came out and I was like 12, so the only thing I remember is thinking how hot Angelina Jolie was. And who am I kidding? She could still hog-tie me and in front of my grandmother. But the game doesn't have any of that. It seems to pick up right after the movie, and there's a lot of talk about fraternities and lore and junk I just cannot bring myself to care about. You flash back in time between James McAvoy's character and his father's character, uncovering the mystery behind his birth and why a League of Assassins wants him dead between two different timelines. It's not that the story is poorly told. In fact, it's actually half good for 2008. Wesley's actor does a decent job with his voice acting, and the script has plenty of attitude, but therein lies the problem. This game's script tries so hard to be edgy and cool, and it's painfully obvious it's just an imitation of what a movie screenwriter thinks is edgy and cool. A knockoff of the tropes of the day. There's plenty of over-the-top violence and swearing, but it just feels stale, and it isn't helped by the robotic animations in the game's cutscenes. Though the game smartly seems to have taken some heavy Max Payne influences, having McAvoy deliver his overwrought internal monologues over gameplay and exploration, an appropriate homage for being a stylish gunplay-focused third-person shooter. Oh, but the pre-rendered cutscenes this game uses to hide loading screens look like fucking trash. Maybe this kind of aliasing and artifacting was okay in 2008, but blown up on an HD screen now, it looks god-awful. It's appropriate the game constantly tries to get you to skip them with an X button prompt. Because the real draw here is the gameplay. Oh, and this game has like a full cast, including Common, Terrence Stamp, and Peter Stormare, which this makes the second shooter from this era that Peter Stormare has been in. But enough of this story junk, how is the actual murdering people? Well, it's alright actually. The core of the game is the cover system. It's fast-paced, well-designed, and has a variety of ways to move from cover to cover. There are even pushable pieces of cover that you can move forward under fire, a dynamic version of those few sequences in Gears of War 1. You can also engage in close-quarter quick killing or take some enemies hostage to use as portable meat shields. Being exposed is a quick way to die, as damage is heavy even on normal difficulty, so you'll always want to be in cover. The movement between cover actually works similarly to the system in Terminator Salvation, where you just aim towards an adjacent piece of cover and jet over to it seamlessly. And I've seen the comments asking me to review Terminator Salvation, and don't worry, I will get to it eventually. The neat thing about cover is how they implement blind fire. Plenty of enemies use shields in defensive positions, meaning you can suppress them by blind firing and flanking to find a weak spot. The movement while in cover is a little sluggish. This system still works well though. It feels like a better aged version of what Army of Two tried to do with its aggro system. It's also worth noting how animation heavy the game is, yet how smooth it feels. The flourishes as you dance over cover and around corners, and even how characters dip and duck away from fire while in cover help the game's overall presentation feel incredibly modern and cinematic, despite the poorly aged script and storytelling. This system also becomes the crux of a variety of boss fights throughout the game, none of which are particularly challenging or memorable. You just kind of figure out the one way you're supposed to do damage, rinse, and repeat. Like any good shooter, Wanted implements new gameplay mechanics over time. And this is true of the cover system as well, to which there is a surprising additional depth as the game plays out. As you gain adrenaline, which can be expended for a variety of special moves, more on those in a minute, you also gain new abilities, including enhanced movement where you can activate slow-mo while moving between cover to pop off a few opportune shots. It's one of the many clever additions to the cover shooting formula Wanted has up its sleeve. The one major drawback of Wanted is that there is next to no weapon variety. While certain set pieces and moments have you manning turrets and sniper rifles like any other shooter, for the most part you're sticking with one or occasionally two handguns. And strangely, the game makes it work thanks to its main gimmick, curving bullets. Like the movie it's based on, you can curve bullets in midair to take out targets in cover and eventually multiple targets at once. The bullet curving is part of the aforementioned adrenaline system, which keeps the overall game moving at a really brisk pace. The way it goes is simple. You expend adrenaline to use moves like slow-mo and curving bullets, and kills while using those moves return adrenaline to you. The result is that as long as you're smart and accurate, you can basically mow through enemies with all the tools at your disposal in a beautiful ballet of bullets and death. It's a really smart, really well-implemented system. The gunplay itself is fine. The aiming is tight, the feedback is serviceable. I will say there is a weird weight to horizontal aiming that can whip your view around when not in cover, but this isn't a game like Gears where every shot is going to feel great, and it's not meant to be. Wanted treats your gun as an extension of your movement arsenal, shooting around cover, slow-mo between cover, etc. It's honestly more like a cover shooting Devil May Cry, allowing players to stylishly demolish groups of enemies in quick succession as they exhibit more mastery over the game's core systems. The side effect of this is that enemies are basically interchangeable meat bags with very little variety. There are shielded enemies and shotgun enemies, but variety isn't the name of the game with what they do so much as how you can kill them. The AI is pretty decent though, ducking and moving through cover erratically. Like every game from this era seemingly, Wanted does have its equivalent of QuickTime events, which are these set-piece sections where time slows down and you slowly aim at either oncoming bullets or groups of enemies or both, with time slowing and speeding up as you run through the scene. It's a bummer these are in the game because it would have been rad to do all this stuff through actual gameplay. but they're mostly harmless and are vastly more appreciable than generic dial-a-button junk I'd expect out of a licensed shooter. I will say that on a technical level, these sequences are very well shot and organized, with lots of impressive motion capture and choreography. It's moments like this you can tell how much hard work really went into the game. Oh, and there are actual QTEs that rear their head in close combat with knife-wielding enemies, but they're brief. Unfortunately, the rest of the game isn't as exceptional as Wanted's combat system. The game performs nicely, with minimal frame drops and only some screen tearing here and there. I did run into run glitch where I fell out of the world, but I'm going to chalk it up to an edge case. Graphically, the game is a real mixed bag. It technically looks good for the time. The environments are nicely detailed and varied, and the textures are pretty crisp. The lighting is pretty okay as well, but in trying to ape the cinematic style of the film, the overall color palette and visual variety is incredibly lacking. It's not that everything is cast in the grays and browns I'm used to, it's that everything is fucking yellow, which is somehow even worse. It's like if the Matrix covered everything in piss instead of CRT monitor green. What environments aren't lit like the bastard spawn of Deus Ex Human Revolution are the typical bland gray shooter outings going for realism in an era where realism now looks uncanny and cartoonish. The game also utilizes a frankly criminal amount of bloom and blur, which I think is meant to help create a sense of distance in the environments and maybe hide some loading or pop-in, but it really just looks bad. The environments themselves have a nice variety, between picturesque mountains and European villages and even Chicago back alleys. But they all serve as arenas for killing, and you move through them so fast there's no time to appreciate the environmental detail, which is fine by me. Altogether, Wanted is a good game from a bygone era, one where you could rent a 360 game on a whim from Blockbuster, beat it in a weekend, have a good time, and never think of it again. It's a competent and satisfying shooter with some solid ideas and solid execution. I won't be returning to it like some of the other games on the list like Quake 4, and it's short on truly memorable moments. But for its brief runtime, Wanted is a pleasant, if tonally outdated, surprise. So, originally my third entry for this video was going to be Legendary, the 2008 shooter from Turning Point Fall of Liberty developer Spark Unlimited. But that game is bad, and after almost a week of chipping away at Darkest of Days, and with the release of Halo Infinite looming, I wanted to revisit Halo 4. Plus, I was kind of already playing it. 343's second outing with the Halo franchise after Halo Anniversary, Halo 4 is the first new non-Bungie developed entry in the franchise, and has been divisive for a lot of the fanbase. Some people don't like the more serious story, the Promethean enemies, the fact that you don't actually visit a Halo ring, and many other contributing factors. But for my money, Halo 4 might just be my favorite game in the franchise depending on the day you ask me. If not, it's a close tie with Halo 3 and ODST certainly. Halo 4 is an obvious labor of love from people who admired the Halo franchise and attempted the unenviable task of deconstructing one of the most important FPS series ever to reinvent it while still keeping its individuality and style intact. The result is a game with familiar elements. Reach's armor abilities are retained, the familiar shield, grenades, and weapons are all intact. But there's also small changes to the formula that help modernize the game's feel, in line with the games like burgeoning Call of Duty series at the time, like a run button. Chief can now run without the aid of an armor ability, a new cadre of Promethean enemy types put spins on the Covenant archetypes players have grown familiar with by now, and their accompanying weaponry ranges from interesting and fresh to merely utilitarian. The Prometheans are a big sticking point from the game, and to be honest, I think a lot of the criticism of their place in gameplay is valid. Halo 4 doesn't do much to set their behaviors apart from Covenant enemies. The Watchers are basically grunts that can crawl on walls. The Knights are basically elites that can be resurrected by the little floating guys. I will say I prefer this incarnation of the Knights to the bullet sponge juggernauts they would become in Halo 5, and overall I think most of the initial changes to the Halo formula work better in 4 than they do in 5. Weaponry is another sticking point for many people, but I honestly don't mind. Halo 4 keeps an optimal Halo gameplay flow by presenting a variety of enemy types all dealt with best using different weaponry. The same rock, paper, scissors game of plasma weapons beating shields and bullets beating unshielded enemies still applies, and with the addition of the Promethean arsenal, there are more options at players' disposal than ever. Is the light rifle maybe a bit too similar to a DMR and a carbine? Sure, but you'll rarely have to choose between them, and the game moves at such a clip you barely noticed. New weapons like the Sticky Grenade Launcher, Binary Rifle, and an improved shotgun over Reach are also welcome additions. I still do not understand what the hell they were thinking with the bizarre Promethean grenade, and the Storm Rifle has never been a valid substitute for the classic Plasma Rifle. Honestly though, These minor issues are my biggest complaints about Halo 4. I love this game. I have a lot of nostalgia tied to its story and world. So while my perspective is going to be a bit more skewed compared to some of the other games I've reviewed on this series, I think Halo 4 is still fully worth praising almost a decade after its release. Probably the biggest thing to praise about Halo 4 is the insanely gorgeous graphics. While some textures now seem a little bit blurry and some polygons are slightly jagged, I don't think there's a single game that has aged as gracefully visually from the era, either on PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360, except maybe Gears of War 3. And it's not just the slick frame rate, visual fidelity, incredible lighting, and smartly implemented bloom and lens flare that helps make Halo 4 still look amazing. 343 threw in the kitchen sink in the art design department too. From the opening fight against the Covenant Armada to the mysterious opening chapters exploring the Forerunner world of Requiem, Halo 4 is a cornucopia of gorgeous set and environment design. Some people may complain about how 343 took the plain, strong polygonal design of Bungie's Forerunner architecture and greebled it to hell, making surfaces needlessly busy. I can't disagree more, and not only looking at how Bungie complicated their own designs for Forerunner tech in Halo 2 and 3, and how greebled a lot of those original designs were in finalized concept art, I think Halo 4's aesthetic design is mostly a rational step forward for a studio trying to spread its own wings in the shadow of greatness Bungie left behind. I love the designs for Chief and Cortana. I think the Prometheans themselves look neat and unique, and I think the Covenant redesigns give enemies like Grunts and Jackals more personality and expression than ever before. It's truly impressive the texture work that went into the leathery skin of your alien enemies. Speaking of characters, Halo 4's big selling point for lore fans was a more serious story, focusing on Chief and Cortana's relationship as he races against time to not only stop a threat to all of humanity, but to prevent Cortana's own mental degradation as she reaches rampancy, a point where AI drive themselves insane after spending too many years processing data. While the story of Chief's battle against the villainous Didact and the Forerunner lore that comes with may go over the heads of players who don't pay attention to every single word that's said, the obtuseness of some narrative elements never bothered me. The story of Cortana and Chief is the core here, and it's pulled off incredibly well, with Jen Taylor delivering an often heart-wrenching portrayal of an AI questioning her own existence, and Steve Downes really hitting some strong emotional notes. Master Chief has often been the default for strong stoic gaming badasses, and seeing 343 attempt to put him in a battle he can't win, and delivering that realization over several hours, makes for a powerful finale that plays to the strengths of the series and its characters while still treading new ground. I've considered making a video essay on Halo 4 with how Chief and Cortana's relationship mirrors that of someone trying to care for someone with chronic depression or another similar mental illness. It's something I'm sure I could do justice, and it's an issue I have plenty of personal experience with, so let me know in the comments if it's something you'd be interested in seeing. Halo 4 also delivers an impeccably polished multiplayer suite, one of what I feel is one of the best in the series. And to round out the package is Spartanops. While it's no substitute for a proper firefight mode, this 4-player campaign is one of the most ambitious expansions I've seen for a AAA game ever, and it's a shame it was never innovated on for this or any other series. A long series of short missions, Spartanops was a free expansion that kept the story of Halo 4 going long after launch. It doesn't focus on Chief, but as a Halo buff, the opportunity to squad up with friends and just be a Spartan doing Spartan things is such a good time, even if a lot of the levels are repurposed from the campaign and multiplayer. It's more of a good thing, and with something as good as Halo 4, that's hard to complain about. Halo 4 is a hugely important game for me. It's one of the reasons I'm in the industry. It hit at the perfect time for me to be creatively impacted by its world and story, and it reignited a long-time love for the world and universe of Halo that I doubt will ever go out. But in addition to all its personal attachments, it's also just a damn fine shooter, taking a classic gameplay formula and modernizing it for the time in such a meticulous way that it itself has become timeless. Another great entry in a storied franchise that holds up better than almost any of its contemporaries. Has its share of problems, but they are minuscule compared to the sheer volume of ways in which it succeeds. It's just a hell of a game all around, and will likely be sitting at the top of this ranking for a good long time. Hello everybody, and thank you for watching, and welcome to the channel. As always, please like, subscribe, comment, share, and just help me generally get more subscribers so I can continue my goal towards eventual world domination. If you heard some weird noises in the background of this video, that was my dog, and I've been working on some audio issues as well lately, so please bear with me. If you'd like to help me work through these audio issues and just generally help support my work, including being able to get me more interviews so I can make more documentaries like my Fear 3 one, please consider giving to my Patreon, and you can also be listed on this fine group of Patreon contributors you're seeing right now. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see everybody next time.